So for this week's podcast review, I decided to do the PKA 460 episode 460. And so basically over time, I from watching this podcast, I can tell that theirs is like the ideal goal at the end of the day. If I decide to, well, if me and Cameron decide to ever continue our podcast, like we'll shift from video games eventually at one point in the near future to like just talking about everything, like not everyday life, but like main issues and topics that are going on in the world. Because like now that I'm thinking about it, the video game genre is slowly but surely becoming oversaturated because a lot of people talk about video games. And so the way that PKA stands out, I'm not really sure how they really stand out. I guess it's because of the quote unquote star power they have with the older YouTubers that they used to be. Perfect example was FPS Russia, but now with their recent episodes, they've started to have a little bit more guests. I believe like a couple episodes before this one, they had Arian Foster as a guest, and this episode they have Bruce Green, who's one of the former members of Funhouse. They also have a gaming podcast, which I'm gonna probably end up reviewing. But really, this episode was different to me because instead of having one guest, they had two, and so really, it's just how do they interact with both guests and keeping the audience interested in talking to both of them, because this is a 4 hour long podcast. So it's really interesting to see how do you keep the audience interest in two separate people who come from two different backgrounds. Well, actually, no, I lied. The other Bruce and Tucker, the other guests, they both, all of these guys at one point worked or were sponsored by Machinima, which was an older YouTube company that, yeah, well, not YouTube company, but an older producing company that got shut down over the years. So I think that's the little dynamic where they talk about the old days of working for Machinima and current events. And like for this episode specifically, they talked about Kyle FPS Russia. They talked about what happened to him in jail because he just got out of jail when this episode had came out. And so it's what I covered in the previous podcast. It's the stories that they tell about the past that keep people interested in watching their shows. And it to me that's a little bit interesting because you would think that people only want to hear about the now and the relevance, but I guess stories of people going to jail are very interesting to the point where they don't care. They just want to hear that story and they want to know about that experience that they had. So basically, what I'm getting from this, if we do, which I think we will have a guest in the future, we have to find a way to keep that guest, like we have to find a way to keep our audience's attention on the guest and us at the same time. So it's going to be a little bit of a thing that we're going to have to talk about and try to work out. But at the end of the day, I feel like it might work for us if we not practice it, but at least talk about it and write it all out, if that makes sense. So, yeah.